just went and laid back in my bunk. And I just let tears roll down my face and I just pumped my fist. Because I knew this was the moment. This was the moment that God prepared me for.
Hi, this is the third part of my interview with Anthony Graves. If you haven't watched the previous parts, you might want to start from the beginning to get the full story. I must say I was surprised that the second part got more views than the first one. A little recap. In 1992, the Texas Rangers come to Anthony's house and arrest him. He's only 26. A few days before, just a few miles away, 6 members of a family were brutally murdered and their house set on fire. Robert Carter, the father of one of the victims, was arrested because he was found with burns on his body. So why is Anthony taken into custody? Just because Robert Carter told the police he had committed the crime with him, despite the fact that they barely knew each other. At this point of the story, Anthony has already spent 2.5 years in prison and was found guilty of a capital crime. Now we move to the sentencing phase.
You have the guilty and innocent phase, then you have the punishment. And so now the sentencing phase is the punishment. And my attorneys want to have my family testify to help save my life. But I'm not in that space because I'm disappointed. I don't want my family to have nothing to do with this. I don't want to have nothing to do with it. But I don't have a choice. So my attorney comes to me and he says, hey man, we want to put your family on to testify about your character. I said, nah. He said, man, I believe in your innocence, but I know the state will kill you. And we need to save your life first. And we need to put your family up there to talk about who you are. And I said, man, I don't want that. He said, why? I said, man, because this is a joke. How you gonna take me from my home, charge me with a crime that happened in another town that I don't even go to? I don't even know the people don't know me. And yet I'm still up here fighting for my life. So I don't want my family being a part of this. But reluctantly I agreed because they wanted to. So I sit there and I listen to my mom during the sentencing phase get up there and testify about her son being the glue of the family, being her oldest, being the strength. I listened to my sister get up there and talk about how her oldest brother take care of her kids in the evening so that she can go to night school to be a nurse. Then I listened to my own son. And that's my son that has sickle cell anemia. And I listened to him sit up there and try to tell 12 people who didn't know his dad that he needed his dad, that his dad was his strength, that every time he go to the hospital, I was always there. Well, after he testified, they went back into the jury room, and an hour and a half later, they come back and sentence me to death with no evidence, other than me just being a black man. No evidence. That's the part that bothers me more than anything, is you didn't value my life at all. You sentenced me to death with no evidence. You are supposed to be the gatekeepers to make sure it works, to hold them accountable. And you sentenced me to death with no evidence. And the only thing I have to say to those 12 people that did that to me, shame on you. You make our system not work. Shame on you. You almost murdered me. Shame on you.
You mentioned a lot of flaws in all the legal proceedings that led to your conviction. One of the flaws you didn't mention yet was the psychiatrist who talked about you during the sentencing phase.
Yeah, this doctor named Dr. Walter Keanu. And he comes with an incredible reputation himself. But he testified that now that I had been convicted, and that I would be more of a danger to society. I don't know how he got that, and I'm not even a criminal. But We come to find out years later that he got himself in some trouble with some of his analysis around black people and how more likely we are to commit crimes because of our color. This was the same doctor that was saying, after talking to me no more than 15, 20 minutes, that I would be a threat to society now that I've been convicted. Once again, it's just all bakes into the cake of injustice. It all bakes into the cake of us system against them, we versus them. Dr. Walter Keano was playing a role for the state prosecutor. That's just simply put. And he was getting paid.
We talked about him during the first episode of Death Row Stories when I interviewed Estelle Hebron-Jones. She mentioned him in all the cases where he testified.
Dwayne Buck was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in 1997 in Harris County. And during his trial, during the punishment phase, the defense expert, one of the defense experts, Walter Kahano, was on the stand. He testified for Mr. Buck. And then the state cross-examined him. And during that cross-examination, the state asked him whether his race was a factor to be considered and whether he would be a future danger or not. And this was an important question because juries have to answer whether they believe the person is a future danger or not to give the death penalty. So when asked whether race was a factor that influenced whether he would be a future danger, Walter Kahano said yes, that it would. And after this, it was determined that in Mr. Buck's case, as well as a few others that happened before around between 1992 and Mr. Buck's case in 1997, that Walter Kahano had provided similar testimony in case of both Black and Hispanic defendants. And in those cases, the Attorney General confessed error and agreed that relief should be granted. Now, the six of them, the Attorney General kept that promise. However, in Mr. Buck's case, they did not, which is why they had to take the case to the Supreme Court. The Attorney General's office argued that, that statement that Dr. Kahano agreeing is just something very, very small. But when the Supreme Court came out with its opinion in February of 2017, they said that some toxins are deadly even in small doses. And that's how Mr. Buck got relief, and he was ultimately resentenced. He did not get the death penalty. And it's a big case in thinking about how even just small, the influence of race can have a big impact, no matter the size of the testimony, the amount of testimony has a big impact on outcomes in cases.
So you arrive on death row in November 1994 at the age of 29. 400 people are on death row at that time. Like everyone else, you are alone in your cell. You hear people screaming to communicate, but you feel depressed. You don't want to talk to anyone at the beginning, right?
Yeah, I wasn't supposed to be there. You just put me at what society deems as the worst of the worst living on our planet. And you just put me there to live amongst them. I didn't want to talk to nobody. I didn't want to socialize. I didn't want to be there. So for the first week, I just kept my headphones on, and I just laid in my bed and dreamed about being at home until someone called out my cell number and introduced me to the ways of death row and the people that are there. And I come to find out at that point, everybody down here is a human being. Some may have made a 5-minute mistake of their life, and we're going to kill them now. Some of them are mentally ill, mentally challenged, and we're going to kill them. Some of them deserve lesser included offenses, but they didn't have good attorneys, and we're going to kill them. Most of them are guilty, and we're going to kill them. Everybody was meeting the same fate down there. The death penalty was designed to do what it was designed to do. And while I was there, over 400 people were murdered around me that I was growing up with back there. And I can tell you, not all of them was guilty, but that's how their story's gonna be written. And it's just a sad day when I think about that I was actually just a lottery pick among innocent people on death row.
Day after day, you discover that, like everywhere else in the world, on death row, there is drug, there is sex and money. Can you tell us about that and tell us about the everyday life on death row?
Well, the everyday life on death row was that you had to find a way to make a life, because death stared at you all day, every day. You had a sentence of death. People were getting executed around you, right? And you had to somehow try to create a life amongst all this chaos, right? So death row was made up of different characters, man. Who and then they had female officers that were working down there now. So when you bring male and female together and they stay around each other day in and day out, 10, 12 hours a day, they get to know each other. And walls start breaking down. And then they're human beings, man. They're human beings. And so a lot of everything went on back there that I've never really talked about, but a lot of everything went on back there, man. If you think of it, probably it happened, because there was man and woman behind those bars. Even though a woman was working, she was still behind there with the men that you put there. And they got to know each other. And sometimes lines were crossed. I mean, it doesn't matter where you were, you still putting men and women together. And lines can get crossed like that. And so a lot of things took place.
Sometimes men and men too, I guess.
That's everywhere. That's out here too. Yeah, but behind those bars, man, people try to live a fantasy life. One that they create in their own mind, just by circumstances. So there's no telling what's going on back there. But a lot of everything go on. And then you die.
You're talking about the good part of it. There are also rapes. We had Kerry Max Cook, for example, said he was raped when he was on death row.
The inmates brutalized me and as a sex offender. And every time I wanted to fight back, I said, no, Smith County's making up. They'll say I'm violent, I'm dangerous. My mom and dad and Joel Wayne, they lost everything. Carrie, running away from home, getting in trouble. I gotta get out. I gotta show her I've changed. I've learned my lesson. I'm awake now, I'm wide awake. And I let the inmates rape me. I let pedophiles do terrible things to me on death row. I let the guards mistreat me, didn't stand up to it. The whole point for that, I had such amazing complex PTSD. I beat up on myself, I punished myself. I'd say for years, Sandra, the only thing to make what I've sacrificed and had to do to survive Texas death row is exoneration. That's the only thing that's going to help me forgive myself.
Is this something you've seen also?
I mean, even out here, man, people prey on the weak. Right? It's no different back there. If you show signs of weakness, you get preyed upon. So yeah, I've seen men get preyed upon back there. I know Kerry, so I know his story. But I've seen a lot of men get preyed upon back there.
You made friends on death row, and sometimes you were with them during their last hours living. Can you tell us how you got there and how you managed to stay with them in that moment?
Well, back then on death row, when a man was scheduled for execution, the day of his execution, he can fill out a list of people that he want to see before they execute him. And several times, men that I got to know will put my name down as someone they want to say goodbye to. And during that day, the officer will come and escort you down to that person's cell. and we'll, for 15 minutes, we'll be able to say our goodbyes to each other. And I guess there was some sort of human decency to that. But I remember going down there and speaking to many men who was just ready to be executed. They didn't care to live like this no more because it wasn't living. Right? And so they were ready to check out. I remember talking to one of them and trying to tell him to keep his head up, keep his dignity about himself. And he looked at me, he said, "Hey man, I'm ready to check out. I'm ready to go. You the one who's gonna have to worry about them tearing up your property tomorrow in your cell. I'm done." He had been there 18 years and he was ready to just go. And it wasn't because he didn't think he could win his case. It's because he was just tired of the living conditions. We were existing, we were not living. And it got old to a lot of us.
Can you tell us how death row was the day of an execution?
On the day of execution, well, death row was quiet. We would refuse the meals that the state would serve us that day. Everybody would just give a day of silence in our cells. We didn't eat anything. We kind of fastened that day in respect to the person that they was going to be executed. Not all participated, but for the most part, a lot of us honored the person that was being executed by denying the meals for the day.
I did a full episode of Death Row Stories about the heat in prison in general. Can you tell us about your experience of the heat on death row? The extreme heat, I want to say, because many people say, yeah, well, it's not supposed to be comfortable, but we're talking about extreme heat.
No, we're talking
here.
extreme heat. We're talking the type of heat that kills people. I remember in 1995, 96, they had moved me to this cell that was up on the third row and was behind a tin building. So air could come into the cell, right? It was just hot. And during the summer, here in Texas, it's very hot, but it's like 20 degrees hotter in those cells. It was so hot that we would get out of all of our clothes and try to lay down in some water in our cell to cool off, but the water was burning hot by the time you put it on the floor. And you could probably fall asleep at 3 in the morning, but about 4 o'clock, the heat was right back on you and you was back up to deal with it all over again. And young men, I ain't gonna say young men, but I know a man who died in his cell of a heat stroke. Didn't make the news, but he died because of the horrible conditions. We were behind a tin where we couldn't get no air and we were suffocating. And the heat is just really unbearable in those conditions.
One evening, you receive a letter from your mother about your eldest son. What does she say?
Yeah, my mother wrote to me to tell me that my son had a stroke. My oldest son, the one that sit up there and told the jury that he needed his dad. Well, he had a stroke at the age of 15 because he had sickle cell. And so I got the letter where my mom was telling me that what had happened to my son. But she made sure that he was okay before she wrote and told me. So by the time I got the letter, he was doing much better, but he had suffered a stroke.
He was in the coma, right?
He was in a coma, and they were set to pronounce him dead that Monday. But that same day they were set to pronounce him dead, he woke up.
And you felt really depressed at that point, right? You needed to talk about it with someone.
Yeah, you keep saying depressed. I don't use the word depressed because I never found myself depressed. I found myself disappointed. I found myself reflecting. And, it's just like everyone else, when something is stressing you out, you need to communicate with someone about it. And I was no different. I had just gotten bad news about my son. And they allowed me, I reached out to a officer that was working, and he went and talked to the captain, and they allowed me to go down and call my mom. So I was able to call my mom, and she rest assured that my son was okay.
Your lawyer will make an appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeals. Your case will, from that point, take a difficult legal road, right?
Well, yeah, just like most of them, they're rubber stamp cases. The courts are designed to rubber stamp the case to get you on through the process and execute you. So I was going through the process. They were denying my case and sending me on to the execution chamber.
At that point, your case is in the system.
Yes.
Slowly going from one step to another, and you start reading, writing, and including writing letters to pen pals.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that was, that's what we all did, you know. We reached out to people and asked for help, you know, and they had what they call pen pal banks. There were people who would write to men and women on death row, right? They would get their name and everything, and they'd write to them and just let them know that they was not by themselves. And I was no different. So when people would write to me, I would respond to them. And I ended up developing a lot of relationships across the globe from people who were writing to me, particularly Europe. Europe is like, man, Europeans are like, that's family for me, because those were the ones that stepped up for me. All the people that was communicating from me were from France, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, not America, not America. And so I always tell people that what saved me was my friends and family in Europe, because they would come visit me, they would write me letters, you know, and they would make sure that I understood that I was not by myself. And I will forever be grateful for my European allies, because it's because of them I'm still breathing today. America had given up on me. They didn't care anymore once I was sentenced. As far as they were concerned, I was guilty of something I did not do. But my European friends and allies seen through the BS and stood with me until I came home. So yeah, I spent a lot of my time writing letters, reaching out to people, asking them to help save my life, developing relationships and friendships that I treasure to this day.
In another episode, I mentioned an escape from death row that took place in 2000, and you mentioned another one, which was very important, who took place in November 1998. And tell us what happened and tell us what it changed for you.
7 men tried to escape death row, and because of that, they locked down death row. We whatever privileges we had were taken from us. We were now on mandatory lockdown, and then they moved us from that prison to a more secure prison.
This move to this new facility is a big change for you guys.
We had no more privileges, right? As I said, where we could piddle and make boxes and clocks and watches out of wood, they took all that from us. All right, so now we were just sitting in the cell 23 hours a day, where before the escape, we could come out of our cell every hour on the hour. We could stay out till 10 o'clock at night if you was on a work program, and I was always on the work program. But all that was taken away, and now we're just in this little cell where you can reach out your hands and touch the walls, and we're in here 23 hours a day, day in and day out. And then on the weekends, you're just in there until Monday. It was literally driving men insane. Literally driving men insane. And it's still happening today. Literally driving men insane. And then we execute them.
There were still rec groups.
Because by law, you still have to take us out of our cells, so we still have to have a rec, right?
Yes.
But they moved everybody around.
And you end up in the same rec group than Robert Carter, the man who took you there, by lying on you.
My neighbor hits on my wall and shouts to me, hey man, they got that guy that lied on you in our rec group, right? So the next morning, they take us out one by one to go to the rec group, to the rec yard. and they take Mr. Carter out. I see they took him by, and they take some other people out. Then they come get me and they take me out. By this time, Mr. Carter is sitting in the rec room. So they bring me down and they unhandcuff me. And when they unhandcuff me, I look up, I see him sitting at the table. He starts walking toward me, right? And he apologized for calling my name and messing up my family. And he was just telling me how he was sorry for that, you know, and that he had been reaching out to my attorneys and whoever to try to tell them the truth. And I told him, I said, hey man, I can forgive you, but we can't be in the same rec group. That's not gonna happen, right? One of us gonna have to get out of this rec group. And he said, man, I'll get out. And he went and told the officer that he was in the rec group with the man that he lied on, and he needed to get out. So immediately they moved him, they took him out, took him upstairs and packed up his stuff and moved him to another place.
But you forgave him.
But I forgave him for me, not for him. I had to fight for my own sanity, try to make sense of my life myself. So it wasn't about forgiving him. It was about forgiving him for me, so that I can now start trying to make sense of what's happening in my life. But I had to get beyond being angry and frustrated with someone, and that someone was this man who lied on me. So to be able to forgive him was to release me, so that I can now focus on my life, if that makes sense. So.
Oh, this is incredible. And he's executed in 2000.
Yes.
How do you feel about his death?
I have no feeling about his death. When I was there, 415 people were murdered. He was just one of them. But it did make me think about my own mortality, because I was on the same case he was on. Right? So I never forget the night he was executed, and I was just in my cell thinking, man, they're gonna probably try to really execute me, right? But I'm not afraid, because I'm fighting for the whole world to know the truth. And so I'm not thinking about death. I'm still living. And while I'm still living, I want the world to know what is happening in our criminal justice system, what is happening to me. I'm an innocent man that you all are geared up to kill, and I need y'all to know this. So that's where I was, is that, hey man, they just killed that dude, and they're gonna try to kill me next. I'm gonna make sure everybody know what they're doing. And that's just how I felt. It didn't matter at that time if I came out walking or in a pine box. I had a message to the world. And to the world, I wanted them to know that our system is failing us, and y'all are lining up to support a system that is killing innocent people.
And what did he say just before he died?
Before he died, he gave us what they call a dying declaration. The family that was murdered was there to see him get executed. His family was there to witness his execution. He had a moment to speak, his last breath, his dying declaration. And he could have said anything. He could apologize to the people, he could, whatever he wanted to say. He took that moment to tell the whole world how he had lied on Anthony Graves. And Anthony Graves had nothing to do with this. Those were his last words, was Anthony Graves is an innocent man. Anthony Graves don't know anything about this case. After that, they executed him. And it still took me almost 10 years before I come back home.
In April 2000, for the first time, an execution date is set for you. A stay is granted 10 days later. Your case moves from federal to local courts. In 2002, another execution date is set, and they ask you what you want to do with your body after you are executed. Did these execution dates affect you?
It's hard to say. I'm sure it did. But I'm in fight mode. I'm trying to deliver a message to the world. I'm not focused on whether you're gonna kill me or not. I've been here and witnessed over 400 some executions. So I'm not scared of none of that anymore. because I've convinced myself that in order to get to heaven, you have to die first. So I'm not fazed by none of that talking about killing me, as though you're gonna live forever. I understood that that's not the math. I don't know how to answer that, because I think it motivated me to write more letters, to reach out to more people, to advocate more, but it didn't instill any fear.
One day, a guard brings you a note from another inmate. What does it say?
Yeah, this is March 3rd, 2006. And I'm in my cell, and a guard comes to my cell, and she throws a note in it. And I look at her like, and she says, that's from another inmate. I think it's something about your case. Well, that's nothing for me to get excited about, because it could be that they denied me and they'd set me another execution date. I'm on death row. You don't look for exciting news. So I said, okay. So I took my time to get up and get the note. When I got the note, and I opened it up and I started reading it, and it was just telling me, hey man, congratulations, dude. I just heard on the radio that the Fifth Circuit Court has just overturned your case. Wow. Wow. This is information I've been wanting to hear for at this time, 14 years. Wow. I didn't know what to do.
You wanted to scream.
This is what I'm saying, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to shout and scream, but everybody around me had a death sentence, and more than likely won't get executed. So what I did is I just went and laid back in my bunk, and I just let tears roll down my face, and I just pumped my fist. Because I knew this was the moment. This was the moment that God prepared me for. Now I'm finna live my second chapter, and I'm gonna make a difference. This was my head. They're never gonna kill me. I'm gonna make so much of a difference, they're never gonna kill me. The world will always remember me. That's in my head. Just like they remember Martin Luther King, just like they remember John F. Kennedy, just like they remember Gandhi. I'm gonna make sure these people remember me. So I'm gonna do the work that I need to do so that they live, my work outlived me. And they will always know Anthony Graves. That's why I'm here today.
That's incredible news that Anthony got, but believe me, it's not the end of the story. He wrote a book called Infinite Hope, and I encourage you to read it. It's about this journey and it's absolutely fascinating. But here's the thing, in the next episode of Death Row Stories, there will be a twist I didn't see coming. It's not in the book, and it's something that Anthony speaks about for the first time. And believe me, it's huge. So don't miss the final part. And as always, continue to share my work. It means the world to me. And I want to say a special thank you to all the new Canadian subscribers. Thank you. Merci.